And I know they're going to share a lot of great information with you. I'm really proud that they're up here with you. And I wish I could stay, but I've got to go organize the fun run and get all that ready to go. I know you guys are all running with me today, so I'll see you down there. We're going to hold the race until you get there, Dan. And we'll be running next year. So just kidding. But again, I just wanted to thank them for being here while I had the chance and in front of you all, just so you know how good of people these are. And thank you all for coming and supporting FDIC. Hope to see a bunch of you at Stop, Drop, Rock and Roll tonight, or the fun run, hopefully at both, but either or. And ladies and gentlemen, your moderator today will probably be Eric. Eric will be doing the moderating. Eric is the editor-in-chief of Fire Rescue Magazine and a great friend, also battalion chief in Milwaukee. George is a battalion chief with the FDNY. And Dan Majikowski there is the director of NIST Fire Science Research and Grand Poobah of all things fire science at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And of course, Steve runs the Firefighter Safety Research Institute, and he's also one of the lead researchers at UL Laboratories. And these are guys who are really making a great difference. So ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, science in the big room.
Thank you, everyone. I'll tell you what, it's been a great day so far, and we're going to end on a good high note today with what we have with science in the big room, applying firefighting research. We have a very, very good-sized crowd here. I'm glad you guys all came out. I appreciate it. Like Bobby mentioned, my name is Eric Roden, editor-in-chief of Fire Rescue Magazine, and I'm also battalion chief with the City of Milwaukee Fire Department assigned to the 5th Battalion. And I'm also on the advisory board of the UL's Firefighter Safety Research Institute. With this crowd, you know, in having a size of crowd that we have here today, we have a good ratio of those that are maybe curious about what they've been hearing over the last couple of years about all this firefighting research stuff. Those that are maybe skeptical of what they've been reading and hearing over the last couple of years, and that's good, you know, because then you lead into the other ratio that we have in the room, those that have an understanding of the firefighter or fire-based research that we've been able to conduct. So we have a good presentation. We have the three best guys to explain it to you all today. We're going to start with Chief Healy, a deputy chief in the FDNY. He's going to talk about a couple of bad fires in New York City and why they decided to undertake and join in on all this firefighting research. Dan from NIST will discuss the fire dynamics and structures, kind of a lot of the science and the wonky stuff, if you will, behind all this, because it's important to hear. You know, you guys definitely want to delve into the stuff, read it, and get to that understanding phase. And Dan, nobody can get you on that path better than Dan. Steve Kerber is going to discuss a component of the research that was concluded last year. Also performed, a lot of it performed in my town as well, on attic fires and the technical considerations associated with fires in attic spaces. And at the very end, I'll be narrating a video and kind of discussing what I call the urban and narrative fallacy, that none of this stuff is really, applicable to those in a big city that may get adequate resources. There are a lot of people that are arriving in short order, in under 5 minutes, in starting water and whatnot. So I'll narrate a video of a very, very common scenario in any town, not just our urban towns, but a way that a lot of our urban fire departments can incorporate this stuff and some of the things that you'll be able to do with this that'll actually allow you guys to take a more advanced fires and turn those into offensive fires. That's fires you may decide to call. So without further ado, we'll have George discuss the FDNY's motivation to change.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I know it's late in the day. This has been a week filled with some great opportunities for learning, some hands-on training, and we greatly appreciate the fact that it's late in the game here and you still have the energy up to come out and listen to us speak. As Eric said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the motivation for the FDNY. A lot of times when we do our show, people come up after and they say, you're the guy with the passion. And they're right. Dan and Steve have taught us things we never really knew and understood before. And they work harder probably than their bosses pay them to. And they've developed friendships that will last us a lifetime, and they understand how important it is to people like myself and Eric on the fire ground. And I'll take a little liberty with something that Ray Orozco from the Chicago Fire Department talked about, where the science meets the streets. And that happens on the fire ground for all of us on a fairly regular basis. And my involvement with these two wonderful gentlemen started back in 2006, after I was the incident commander at a fire where there was a real near tragedy. And I was fortunate enough to be introduced to them, and we started down this journey. And I was blind to an awful lot. They knew an awful lot, but they've learned along the way also. So I'm going to play you a quick video, and we're going to listen to some words of a fire officer from the city of New York who got critically burned one day in a very normal, routine, quote unquote, if we can use that word, structure, a private dwelling. No big, serious high-rise, city of New York, multi-story dwelling, a 2.5-story peaked roof private dwelling. And within 11 minutes of him arriving on the scene, he was being removed from the building, not under his own power, but by his brother and sister firefighters with critical, almost life-ending burn injuries. And we'll listen to some of his own words. And now remember, this was back in 2002. This was prior to this partnership. This was prior, to a large extent, to my real education into fire dynamics. And at the time, we understood what we were capable of understanding. We only had certain labels in the FDNY. And I'll tell you how we labeled this incident and the findings that we had after this incident. But fast forward a decade later, with a new, greater appreciation for fire dynamics, a greater understanding, a different set of eyes. And now when we look back and I listen to his own words, he was telling us what happened. We just weren't listening. We were just falling back to that default that we always had. Well, if a fireman got burnt, who should we blame? The engine? The engine didn't do their job. If a firefighter got burned, the engine screwed something up. We know a lot better now. As I mentioned to you, a very average structure. The type of building that you folks respond to every day of the week. The type of structure that you don't particularly pull up to and say, I could get myself jammed up here, although you can. There's a lot of hazards in private dwellings. But typically, these are our day-to-day bread and butter responses. We come to these buildings, we safely mitigate the emergency, and in short order, we're on our way back to the firehouse. Sorry about that.
The date was November 7th, 2002, a year after 9/11. I was working in ladder 165 as a covering officer. We had lunch. An alarm came in. When we arrived, I did my perimeter search. I saw that there were 3 basement windows fully involved. So we know we have the basement fire. The engine company had gotten there before us. We go in. As we're crawling in, we suited up. We're crawling in. My ironsman asks if he can take a window to help get some of the smoke out. Right now, the smoke is about at 3 feet off the ground. Then when the temperature jumped up, the smoke banked down to the ground. Can't see a thing, pitch black. So now we're just trying to follow our way out that we came in, and then it flashes over. We don't get more than, 5 feet, and the whole place lights up. And when it flashes over, the floor is on fire, the walls are on fire, everything in the room ignites.
Flames from a mattress fire that began in the basement of this St. Albans home became so intense they burned through the ceiling, causing a bookcase to topple on firefighters responding on the first floor.
I got up, started running, tripped, fell, lost my helmet. I got up again, tripped and fell again, hit something else. Third time I got up, or fourth time, I'm not sure. I must have hit an entertainment center and it fell on top of me. And now my face piece is burning off. the straps that hold it are melting or burning. I have to hold the face piece on with my hands, or I'm going to breathe in the superheated gases. So now I have to hold the face piece on. I have this entertainment center on top of me, and I can't get it off. And now I'm losing strength. All I can do is hold this face piece on and move one leg. And then all of a sudden, things started getting dark. And I'm figuring my mask is running out. I heard the vibro alarm alert going off, which tells you only have a few minutes left of air. And then everything started getting dark. It was the engine company, the second due engine company, coming in and putting the fire out. They didn't even know I was in there. They thought I made it out with the other guys. The time that elapsed, the safety battalion determined, was only about 15 to 30 seconds. But I was burnt really bad in that time. It seemed like a long time for me. And then all chaos broke loose because they realized I was in there, and they got me out. They got me on the stretcher. The chief got my wife's information. I was able to give him that. I was conscious the whole time, and I was angry. I was more angry than anything else that this happened. I couldn't believe that I'm 10 feet from a door and I'm gonna die. I'm not gonna make this. The pain was excruciating initially. And then I think I just went into shock. It was, everything was burning. I'm burnt 50%. Everything was cooking. And I had no helmet. The pain on the top of my head was incredible. I think there's three things to becoming the best firefighter and the safest firefighter and going home at night. And number one is you need to be in physically good shape. And it's part of the job. You want to be a fireman, you just got to make that commitment now to be physically fit for your career, because you're going to be called on to do things that you need to be physically fit. Training. Always stay in the books. It's your job. You should know everything there is to know about your job. It can keep you alive. And the gear, you got the gear. It makes a difference. When I lost my helmet in that fire, it changed the dynamics completely. The panic level went up tenfold once that helmet came off. If I could do it over again, I would have had that chin strap on, and who knows, that might have made the difference of me getting out and not getting out.
We'd like to thank the DC Fire Department for producing this video and bringing Stephen's words, his own words, to life. Stephen telling his own story. Who wasn't affected watching that? Would it be possible for you not to be affected, especially in the profession that we're in? Think about a daily routine in your life. There are enough hours in the day? How often on a daily basis do we run behind? We find ourselves, we should have been out of the house 10 minutes ago and we have someplace important to go. Maybe you have to get yourselves cleaned up and changed. So you run upstairs, you change quick, you grab the keys, you run out to the car and you start the car. Think Stephen can do that? Think Stephen can run upstairs, change a pair of pants, button a shirt, and get out the door in 5 minutes? As an incident commander, I don't want that to happen to any of my people. Think about when you burn your finger picking up a pot or something. So for a couple of days you have trouble writing or grabbing a pen. Think about Stephen on a day-to-day basis. I was giving a similar presentation one day, and after seeing Stephen's own words at one of the breaks, a fireman comes up to me and says, I've become fairly close friends with Steve. You know what he has to say was the worst part of this whole incident? It was the first time he took his teenage daughter to the mall because she didn't want to walk next to her father. That's heartbreaking. I've got kids. Most of you have kids. Can you imagine? His chin strap. That's something my department's been working hard on, to explain to our members how critically important it is to wear your gear and wear it properly. What did Stephen say about his chin strap? Could have made the difference between him getting out and not getting out. Do we always wear our chin straps? Do we always buckle our waist strap on our mask? Unfortunately, I can rattle off a number of line-of-duty deaths in my own department where very tragically a contributing factor in the death of a firefighter was failure to wear a chin strap and losing their helmet. So if we don't wear our chin strap every day, are you basically saying you're okay with getting yourself injured or killed for the sake of not wearing a chin strap? We go to classes that talk about pride and ownership. And Sean Ducrane this morning gave a very motivational keynote speech about what we need to do to prevent these things. Some pretty simple steps. 3 basement windows fully involved. Stephen's own words. Fire out the windows. Is that good for us in the fire service? We pull up and we see fire venting. What do we think? Good or bad? What were we taught? I was taught good, right? Have you heard that in training, that fire coming out the windows is a good thing? Most of us probably have. We'll get back to that a little bit later in the class. When did this incident change? I like group participation, people. I can keep you late. All right? When he took a window. Yes, I can. Traffic's building. Lock the doors in the back, please. When he took a window, my irons man asked me if I could take a window. Permission to vent. You might want to call that coordination, but we'll get back to that. A very simple structure. This is the layout of the first floor. Or I'm sorry, the cellar. You can see that star on the bottom right-hand corner. That's the area of origin. Most of our basements and private dwellings in New York have been converted to living space, and this was no different. That's the location of where Stephen was recovered from. Remember his words. I was angry more than anything else. I'm 10 feet from a door and I'm gonna die. That's got to be a sobering revelation. 11 minutes in time, actually it was a little bit less than 11 minutes, from him stepping off the apparatus in front of that fire building to being brought out. A lot can change in a short period of time. Something that Dan and Steve will illustrate. Most of us have been taught that fires are hotter today. It's not necessarily accurate. If you want to split hairs, you might say they are, but at the temperatures today's fires are reaching, and even at the temperatures post-flashover of the legacy rooms, it doesn't mean much when wearing gear that the face piece is rated for about 300 degrees and our bunker gear is rated for a standard of about 500. So these were the findings that the FDNY came up with after a multi-month investigation. There was a delayed alarm with an incorrect address. That happens. That happens to us. That happens to you. Because there were 2 alarm assignments sent out for the same incident, we had 1 engine on the scene and the second engine was greatly delayed. That's going to become a tactical issue we have to deal with. This is where we really place the blame. As I said to you earlier, typically in my career, what I've seen is if a firefighter gets burned, the blame winds up getting placed on the engine. You didn't do your job, and now look what we're dealing with. We got a firefighter burned over 50% of his body. He's going to spend the next 3 months in the hospital. We hope he pulls through and he doesn't succumb to infection. And the very same thing happened at this incident. When the engine and the truck had difficulty locating the interior stairs to the basement, they called out to the incident commander and asked for permission to reposition the line because they were being told that there was access in the rear directly into the basement. That message was acknowledged, permission was granted, the line was repositioned, and then Stephen got critically burned. And we blamed the engine company. But that's really all we knew. That's all we understood. But then we began our education through Dan and Steve. We started looking at the horizontal ventilation studies, the vertical ventilation studies. And when we started to see the impact of our ventilation tactics that were born out of the 1970s, the war years in the FDNY, and had served us extremely well, maybe not as well as we thought, but they had served us well for several decades, we blamed the engine company and we overlooked the fact that ventilation was going on. But after we got educated, and now we listen to Stephen's own words, we say to ourselves, you know what changed here? Was the line repositioned? Absolutely. But the game changer was, my irons man asked me if I could take the windows. And now we know it's the new buzzword, and hey, that's wonderful. But now I understand that we created a flow path that allowed that heat and smoke to come up the stairs. That vent wasn't big enough to get all the bad stuff out, and Stephen was critically burned. I've heard in the past, well, you know, Chief Healy, we've heard you, and you're on a crusade, and you get up on your soapbox, and you're very passionate. But I know guys in the FDNY, and they tell me that you're not implementing this stuff. Well, here are our books. My department is implementing it. The leadership of my department has been in favor of this testing and has not taken Chief Healy's word, but had several hundred members of the department involved in this process, exposed to this process on Governor's Island, and have made decisions to change our tactics, not based solely on fireground experience and interpretation of what we think is occurring on the fireground, but marrying my experience on the fireground and the data from the testing that they've provided to us to make changes like this. Incident commanders, chief officers, or company officers should consider ordering an exterior hose line operated into a cellar window to allow for a quick knockdown when there will be a delay in applying from the interior, or whenever the fire conditions dictate. Back in 2002, we were fighting fires from the unburned to the burned, protecting the interior stairs by that first line going through the front door, maintaining their position if they couldn't go down the stairs, or hopefully going down the stairs and putting the fire out. And if we had to, we could reposition the line, which happened that day. We've changed our thought process. Exterior hose lines. Using an exterior hose line. It should only be attempted when no members are operating in the cellar. We're not talking about opposing hose lines, right? Tactical discipline. It must be carefully coordinated and communicated to all units operating on the scene. The primary consideration for members operating on the first floor above a cellar fire would be to shut the door at the top of the stairs. This is still a coordinated attack. And it's still an offensive attack strategy. It's not defensive, even though we're on the outside. The following options should be considered for the safety of all members on the first floor. Operate under the protection of a hose line. Secure an area of refuge or a ready means of egress, or just get out of the building. Communication coordination. But then we put in a note. In an emergency, such as members trapped by fire in the cellar or endangered by fire because of collapse, the IC should order the immediate operation of hose lines into cellar windows. Steve Kerber and Dan Medrikowski have proved to us, and we use straight stream, that the operation of a hand line with a straight stream nozzle is not going to injure a firefighter who is already in danger due to changing fire conditions. We didn't have to do that on the fire ground and guess if we were going to hurt somebody. We were able to do it with them in the laboratory and in acquired structures, and we haven't done it once. They've done it several hundred times now. Because my department wasn't looking to make any radical changes based on 1 or 2 tests and a bunch of assumptions. We've done this an awful lot to prove that we can safely do it for our firefighters. Proper placement of the first hose line requires a coordinated size up. We've done it on the fire ground. This is a fire that happened in Queens. Heavy fire condition on arrival. Our tactic still is to bring that first line through the front door. From the front, it's an attached structure. There were no means of putting water on the basement fire from the exterior in the front. When we got our 360, which is good sound firefighting, now we had a little bit more information. A report was transmitted, hey, we've got direct access in the rear. We communicated to the units on the first floor. We have a coordinated attack, and we rapidly knocked the fire down with no one being injured. Can we make it safer? This was a fire in New York where Richie Scalfani died on the landing between the basement and the first floor. It took us over 22 minutes to get him up, I think it was 7 steps and about 8 feet and out the front door. The FDNY, who responds on an initial alarm with 56 members. Why did it take us so long? Because conditions were so severe, our other members could not operate in that stairwell, in the flow path, for more than seconds without being burned. And Richie succumbed to his injuries. Sean Ducrane talked about it this morning. We owe it to Richie. We owe it to his family to not allow another death similar to his to occur again. It's no criticism of the operation or how Richie was operating that day. It's a tribute to his legacy, to his sacrifice, to his family's sacrifice, because our people are far too important. And we can listen to other instructors like Gordon Graham, who says, we haven't developed new ways to get injured or killed in the fire service. The same themes play out time and time again. An identifiable risk is a manageable risk. This is a manageable risk. Let's identify it and let's prevent it. Because at this fire, there was a request from the outside, can we open up a hose line? And the answer was no. It was prior to the science. There's plenty of NIOSH reports, folks. And the occurrences on the fire ground that lead to these sad reports about injuries and deaths are being mirrored in the work and the experiments we're doing. Fire departments should ensure that incident commanders and firefighters understand the influence of ventilation on fire behavior and effectively coordinate ventilation and suppression. What did the Admiral talk about today? A culture of problem solving. They empower their SEALs to problem solve. I said it last year in my keynote address. Training is for the knowns. We know we're going to have to cut a roof. This is how you cut a roof. Education. Education is for the unknowns. Some of the people that want to criticize this work say, well, no 2 fires are alike. You're right. So we're not telling you this is how you have to do it every time. We're educating the fire service. We're giving them the power on the fire ground to problem solve. When I was a firefighter in Rescue 1, Terry Hatton, the captain of Rescue 1, who died on 9/11, said to us, you're not firefighters, you're fire officers. If you're a member of my company, you are as good and as valuable to the fire chief on the scene as an officer. You're the ones that are going to give him that information that's going to make him change his attack strategy to keep firefighters safe. You, each and every one of you, are an officer. He empowered us to be problem solvers on the fire ground. This contributory factor, tactical ventilation, points to the need for training on the influence of tactical operations, particularly ventilation. A vent opening made between a firefighter or their victim and a path of egress could be fatal if the fire is pulled to their location. Charleston. Honor those 9 members. The report talks about it. We should be able to talk about it. The report mentions it. We should be able to mention it. We owe it to them. God forbid I ever die in the line of duty. Don't sugarcoat it. I'll be pissed. Don't sugarcoat it. Talk about it honestly. Don't let it happen to someone else. We owe it to them. Are you seeing the pattern here? Oh, here's another one. 2 firefighters involved in this incident were seriously injured. There's plenty of these NIOSH reports. Horizontal and vertical ventilation conducted and a powered positive pressure ventilation fan was utilized. UL's looking at positive pressure ventilation fans. They're answering the fire service's questions. The fire service is dictating and driving the work that Steve Kerber and Dan Medrikowski are doing. Enabling the fire service to problem solve on the fire ground. We have our toolbox, we have our Swiss Army knife. Whether it be a transitional attack, a direct frontal attack, an offensive attack strategy, a defensive attack strategy, control, communicate, and coordinate. We all need to know what's happening on the fire ground. Perhaps a flanking attack, tactical ventilation. Educate yourselves, educate your members so you can be problem solvers on the fire ground.
Thanks, sir.
Daniel?
Thank you, George. So, what's changing in the science? What have we learned in the past 10 years for the fire service? Well, we got a understanding that what the fire service was being taught was only part of the story. When you're getting your fire behavior training in that 3 hours or 8 hours or whatever it is was required when you were coming up through firefighter 1, they were only telling you about one ideal of a fire. You had ignition, growth, fully developed fire, and then decay. And that's an ideal fuel-controlled fire. So if you have pallets in the burn building, they're going to burn that way every time. If you have a small fire in a big room, it's going to burn that way every time because it has enough oxygen to burn that fuel to the best of its ability. But the fires that you go to routinely, whether it's in a residential structure or a commercial structure, in many cases are going to be ventilation controlled. And by the time you arrive, we're going to go a step further. They may even be vent limited, which means that they started off as a fuel-controlled fire when they were in the incipient stage, had plenty of oxygen. As they burned and their combustion products started to fill the room of origin and the adjacent rooms that were open to the rooms of origin, it consumed the oxygen that was trapped in the building, replaced it with toxic gas, replaced it with unburned fuel gases and unburned carbon particulate that could also burn again at a later time. And what it needed was, to complete that fire triangle, once it got ventilation limited, it needed more oxygen in order to have flaming combustion. Sometimes the windows would auto-vent on their own and you'd arrive on the scene and there would be flames coming out of the window. Other times you might arrive on the scene and it doesn't look so bad. In many of the NIOSH line of duty death incidents, the survivors would say, we got there, we saw nothing but smoke. And they almost say it as if they were relieved that when we got there, it was just smoke. What did they think? They thought they got there early. They didn't realize the fire would have already flashed over if only it had enough oxygen to do so. So ventilation was made, perhaps in not the most highly coordinated manner that we would think about today. Doors were open to take a quick look, and then the officer might come back and talk to the crew. Or the officer may give a direction to say, we've got a house full of smoke, let's do a search while we bring the line. Because they thought they were early. And then conditions rapidly changed. As you can see in the graph there, vertical line, as Derek Alconis indicated in our hot class, the fire service does not like those vertical lines. And so then as the NIOSH reports went through, they kept coming back over and over and over again that it seems that fires are flashing over faster than ever today. Maybe. Or maybe they're waiting for you. The time when they flash over is when they have enough heat and enough fuel and enough oxygen to do so. So we have to remember one key thing, and that is that smoke is fuel. And here's an easy demonstration you can do in any firehouse at any kitchen table. And just so you don't think that the government spent millions of dollars on a high-speed camera, that was done with my cell phone. So you folks have the power in your pocket to do these kinds of things. The fuels are different today. Another easy demonstration you could do in the firehouse. A piece of wood, notice how clean it burns, how slow the flame would travel horizontally along that splinter of wood. You might get some light gray smoke out of it. And then ignite a piece of expanded polystyrene. Our homes are full of this kind of material. Synthetic material made from petroleum products. Where do we get expanded polystyrene? Cut a piece of foam coffee cup and light it. Notice how sooty it is. It's full of unburned fuel. It would like in excess of 21% oxygen in order to burn cleanly. You've all seen the excellent UL comparison that they did in the lab. Well, here's a comparison that we didn't exactly plan. It just sort of happened. We were burning down in Spartanburg. We went to the local thrift store to purchase some furniture. Both these pieces of furniture in this case are made out of polyurethane foam. Interestingly enough, the polyurethane foam of the 1980s and the 1990s was heavier and denser than the materials in the furniture that we buy today. Even the polyurethane foam that we have in our house is changing over time. And as you see, the newer the furniture, the faster it seems to burn. Flow paths. This is new to the fire service. It's starting to get in the books. It's starting to get in the training manuals and training videos. Various training companies are starting to use the terminology, and we want to make sure we get the terminology correct. So the flow path is basically the geometry of the house. Where are the doors? Where are the windows? Where's the fire? Basically, as you open up ventilation, you're going to be creating inlets and outlets for fresh air and hot gas. Some of those doorways that you'll see here in the animation, that doorway is a bidirectional vent. It has inlet air coming in low. The fire acts as a pump and pumps the heated, higher pressure hot gases out of the doorway. But notice that the flow path itself, if you follow the arrows, the blue as it goes through the fire and turns red around, is unidirectional. The flow path is always going to be unidirectional. Just depends on what the vents are doing and how it moves around. We could also have a similar case if the vent was on the other side of the fire and we had wind on the inlet, where you might have just blue oxygen coming in one side and all red exhaust going out on the other side. Changing in the flow path depending on where the pressure is. Another term you'll hear about is neutral plane. Well, neutral plane is an interface at a vent. Could be a window, could be a door. And when we have the fresh air going in low and hot gases coming out high, the neutral plane is that dividing line. If we don't have a neutral plane in the vent, we call that a unidirectional or a one-way vent. Could be full exhaust, could be full inlet, depending on how the pressure is balanced, because in order to get gases to move, we have to have a pressure difference, and high pressure always moves toward the area of low pressure. So here's some diagrams just looking at a flow path, let's say in a very simple, single, closed room. We have some air low to the floor. This is very early in the fire, an incipient stage. The fire again acts as a pump, and you see that it will start to fill the hot gas layer, and then we'll get some recirculation, and eventually the green arrows will go away as the oxygen's consumed, and it will just be filled with short red, stagnant arrows kind of sitting there waiting for somebody to vent the room. Let's say we open the window first. Well, if we open the window, some of the exhaust gases are going to come out the top of the window, and then below the neutral plane we'll have fresh air going in low, and it's going to drop down because it's heavier and denser than the hot gases and be entrained by the pull and get pulled into the flame coming from the fire. What if we open the door instead? Same kind of thing. We're going to have a neutral plane in the door because that's the only vent in that area. Hot gases are going to come out the top, fresh air goes in low. Let's go crazy. Let's open the door and the window. Now you notice that since the neutral plane in the door is below the sill of the window itself becomes full exhaust because basically it's in the smoke layer. So the only air inlet is from the doorway itself. A door is a much more efficient vent to feed air to a fire typically than a window is. We had a great opportunity in Spartanburg. We've had many, many wonderful opportunities with FDNY, Chicago, Phoenix many years ago. Big, big city fire departments. And then sometimes we get the feeling from folks that, Dan, most fire departments aren't like that. We can't show up with 40 members or 60 members to a fire. We got these 2 guys on a truck. And later, 2 other guys may come, or some folks may arrive by their POV, or the neighbors may decide to help and pull hose or whatever. And, can we do this? Can we use the science to help us? And that's sort of what this program with ISFSI was about, looking at the broader array of fire departments in the United States. So here we have a number of buildings that are about 1,000 to 1,400 square feet. And we did a number of different scenarios with them. In this case, we have a garage fire. And when we went through Spartanburg, we kind of looked at traditional tactics, and then we looked at, is there a better way of doing it or a different way of doing it in any case? So in this case, we're going to do the traditional interior attack. The officer's going to do the size up. But after he does the size up, he's going to do what he's been trained to do, and that is go into the front door, take a line inside. The idea being they don't want to push fire into the house. Open up the kitchen door, or the door which is located between the garage and the house, the residential part of the house, and then apply water. So we're going to have this simulation where we're going to open the door. The thermal imaging camera view that you see in the lower corner there is at the back of the house looking toward the front of the house. It's a central hall in the house looking toward the front door. The kitchen is just off to the left of that central hallway. There you see the firefighter going to open the door. The door is open now. Notice how there's a circulation that started in the kitchen, which is in the rear of the home, based on just opening that door, and some smoke is starting to move into the central hallway. We allowed time for the firefighters to crawl in. We have a pre-deployed monitor that we're simulating fire attack. Notice that even though the fire is venting out the front of that garage, there's still enough excess pressure to push heat into the hallway of that home over those firefighters' heads. The nozzle's flowing. It's a narrow fog. It's flowing 150 gallons a minute. And some were surprised that the fire went out. Well, we have a box full of fire. It's got an air vent to it. We put 150 gallons per minute of water in it. It's going to go out. Success, right? People called the fire department. The fire department came. The fire went out. The interesting thing is, in that process of putting the fire out, Sean DeCrane this morning talked about codes. So one of the things that the codes require typically is that if you have a single-family home with an attached garage, the only rated piece of construction in your home, fire-rated piece of construction in your home, it's not going to be the floor, it's not going to be the ceiling. Typically, it's going to be that wall, and they're going to require a fire door in that wall. So most of the time, the tactic that's currently practiced is you're going to go in and remove the piece of fire protection that's intended to protect the occupants and you to go to start the fire. So let's look at another scenario. We have a similar home. It has an attached garage. In this case, we're going to leave that kitchen door closed. So the bottom views are looking at a video view and a thermal imaging view of the inside of the kitchen door. So we can start to see some heat leakage coming around the sides of that kitchen door a little bit. The officer's doing his size up, and when the officer gets back around to the front of the house, he sees that the only fire involvement is in the garage. He's going to direct his firefighters to use the reach of their stream, flow water into the garage from the curb. There's a car in that garage. Why don't you want to get on top of a car fire nowadays? Struts, hydraulics, all kinds of things want to shoot out at you. Use the reach of the stream. Notice that when they get the stream high in the space in the hot gas layer that they're most effective. They're giving it a little knock low. They get the line up a little bit. Fire's done. 150 gallon a minute straight stream. They flowed for seconds. Then you can move in, get it. Now you can have somebody open the door to the kitchen, through the front door, quickly search the house, walking, having great visibility, not having to worry about any heat. If someone's trapped in there, are they in a better environment than they would have been if you made the attack through the garage door? Would the firefighters in the house be in a better environment? Is there less exposure to the firefighters through this whole evolution in terms of cancer-causing agents, perhaps, as well as heat stress that could onset a heart attack? Was this a success? So they both work, right? It's just which one works best for you. Here we have a fire that you see at the time of this video, we're starting 9 minutes and 30 seconds after ignition. So the fire's been burning for a while. You've been called. You arrive. What did you see upon arrival at 9 minutes and 30 seconds? Light smoke. There's doors open. There's some windows open in the house. Watch how rapidly that condition changes. A minute and a half later, we've got some fire showing. You're pulling lines. You're getting hooked to the hydrant. Your officer's doing a size up with the tick. Watch what's going on during this time. We're coming up on 3 minutes since you first saw the fire. We've also had other comments, and this is why we were doing this experiment. Well, you guys are always putting the fire out when it's only limited to one compartment, or it only has one vent opening. So here again, we're going to have an 1 3/4 line, 150 gallons a minute, straight stream. Let's see what it can do. Use the reach of the stream. Pretty effective. What do firefighters really want to do every time when they see a house like this? They want to get on that porch, don't they? They want to get on that porch, 5, 6 firefighters, 10 firefighters if you can get them on the porch. They don't even care if the flames are licking their helmet, and then they're going to get water in there. And most of the time, you get a pretty cool charred helmet out of it, I guess, and things are okay. But even in Spartanburg, in a fire department next to Spartanburg, they had an incident about 5 years ago. They got on the porch, and the porch collapsed. And it trapped 3 firefighters under the porch. And when that porch is leaning down like this, pinching their hose line, so now they don't have any water, what are they exposed to? They're exposed to that post-flashover fire from the living room. I believe it's about a month ago, a similar thing happened. I believe that firefighter died. In the case, the Spartanburg case, the chauffeur got an axe and started whacking through the top of that porch and got the members out. So fortunately, they only sustained injuries. Use the reach of the stream. Flow path. Flow path comes into play when we start talking about pushing fire. So here we have a incident where if you look at exterior side B, those two windows there, that's the fire room. And those windows are out, and you'll start to see some smoke coming from the windows. That's the only exterior exit. As we look at the other two views on the bottom there, we have the closed room, which is on the AD corner, and we have a visual view in the center and a thermal imaging camera view of that closed room next to it. Up in the upper right-hand corner there, where you see the thermal imaging camera, again, that's the central hall of the house, basically leading from the door of the burn room toward the front door of the house. So we can see some heat building up in the hallway, just a little bit. The fire's struggling because it only has its exhaust and its air inlet into that room. If you did the size up and saw that and immediately got water in that room, this event is done. But we're not going to do that here because we're trying to demonstrate some phenomena for you. So what we're going to do is open that front door. We open that front door. Now we've created another outside vent. We've created another place for the gases to go and another source of oxygen to feed the fire. So now we have a bidirectional vent at the front door, as well as a little bit currently a bidirectional vent at the fire room window. What do you see happening in that hallway? Where are the fire gases moving now? They're moving from the fire room toward the front door. The fire's building. As it gets more fresh oxygen, the heat release rate increases. The amount of combustion products increase. The pressure of the gases and the temperature of the gases increase, so the pressure increases, and the push down the hallway gets even more severe. Notice how the colors are changing, the temperature is increasing. Now we've flashed over that room in the rear. Notice that now we basically have directional vents out of the fire room windows, and all the fresh air is coming down the hall with heavy exhaust going toward the front door. So we close the door to try to shut it down. We shut the oxygen off. What happens? Works pretty good. Now we're going to open the door again. We'll see if we can cycle it back again. Does the fire pick up once again? Absolutely. Because even though we shut the door and slowed it down and made things better and delayed things, what didn't we do? We didn't put any water on the fire. So now we're going to put water on the fire through that window, and you're going to watch the hallway, and you tell me if that hallway gets any worse right outside that fire room based on them applying water. Anybody see any fireball? What if there was a victim laying in the hall? Did you help him or hurt him? That floor was starting to turn yellow and red. Red's probably bad, right? Now all of a sudden it's ambient conditions.
Dan, can I just ask a question here?
Sure.
Remember I asked that question earlier about fire out the window. Is that good or bad? And again, I never really knew if it was good or bad, but I was told it was good. But remember what happened in that hallway view. That hallway appeared thermally to be fairly tenable prior to what? Well, prior to us opening up the front door, creating a flow path, you could see that more heat moved into that hallway. But when did things really change? When it started coming out the front windows, right? So we were always taught, and we were taught this by well-intentioned members of the fire service, and they were passing down knowledge, and that's how knowledge gets passed along in the U.S. Fire Service quite often. But now we can take our fireground experience, and we can take the data and the information that they're giving us, and we can really truly understand what it means throughout the structure when we pull up and we see fire coming out the windows. Or if we start our advance and all of a sudden fire starts coming out the windows. And then hopefully that will empower us to make changes on the fire ground where we now understand if I'm in the rear and I see that happening, I better get on the radio and let everyone know, because if there are crews inside, guess what? They could very possibly be in harm's way. And that harm will come upon them so rapidly that there's a great possibility they won't have an opportunity to change their tactics and to remove themselves from that area of danger. And out of tribute to Richie Scalfani and the double line of duty death in San Francisco and the report that's about to be released, right, Sean, from Toledo, Ohio, we have far too many examples. We have far too many people that we honor. Let's break that error chain. Let's be honest with ourselves, and let's be true to their legacy. Thank you.
So here we have another structure. We've got a couple of flow paths here. You can see on the B side we have fire coming out of the fire room in the rear. On the D side you can see that we have another room that's vented that appears to be communicating with the fire room. They apply a straight stream initially, and then they change it over to a fog line as they get closer and put water into the window. We see they're getting conversion. They're knocking it down. Temperatures throughout the inside of that structure are getting cooler. Success. Let some of the smoke clear, and you can see made a very good knockdown on the fire. Didn't spread the fire to any other rooms. Cooled everything off. That jumped too quick. Let's see. Pardon me, once we start jumping, it gets a little crazy. Here we go. Here's a video from our friend Brian Ward with ISFSI, and this is a great example of partnerships. So NIST had a number of cameras out there. The South Carolina Training Academy had a number of fires out there looking at this fire, and none of our cameras caught this phenomena just because they were angled just a little bit wrong or weren't quite far enough away from the building. So thank you for Brian for providing us with this. This is the house on the other side of the street of the house I just showed you. So in this case, we're going to attack this fire with a wide fog from the outside. Again, not something that's recommended. So we have these two rooms that are communicating. There you see the neutral plane in the fire room, and there you see that we have a unidirectional flow from the room next door because the sill height is higher than the air inlet. You'll notice that as it's burning, we have such rich fuel gases coming out of the smaller window that they can't catch fire until they lean out enough, mix with enough oxygen, and start to burn. So as the camera pans back, you'll see some flames up above the roof line or the eave line that are actually in the smoke that's coming out of the smaller window. Now we're going to attack it with a fog line. There's your fireball. Why do we have a fireball in that case? Because we're air entrainment. We blocked the vent where the hot gases were going out, so that extra fuel stayed in the room. We entrained air into the space, and we basically didn't get any water into the space. Once they stepped up, got water in the space, things got better. So the following year at Spartanburg, we had an opportunity to do a side-by-side demonstration. So in this case, on the second floor, the top two images are showing you the video view and the thermal imaging view of side A of the house, the front of the house. We have two similar sized rooms with similar fuel loads that we ignited at the same time. The lower views show you the entrance from the rear of the house looking up the stairs. Again, a video view and a thermal imaging camera view. The two rooms are connected by a short hallway less than 4 feet wide, and it has wood paneling on it and a combustible wood ceiling. That's why I have that burning in there. So on the one side, we introduce a straight stream, 150 gallons a minute, bouncing it off the ceiling. With the straight stream, we're maximizing the water getting in the space. We're minimizing the air being entrained, and most importantly, we're leaving that lower pressure vent open to allow combustion products and any steam that might be generated out. Now we're going to do a bad thing. Wrong tactic, wrong tool. Fog nozzle, get you the push down the stairs. So for those that have said, hey, I've had fire pushed on me, possibly you had. Is there a way you can do it without pushing fire or creating a high pressure to move those hot gases that are ready to ignite once they mix with oxygen, effectively are pushing fire? Yes. Use the straight stream. Don't whip it around to cover the window, and life will be good. Again, even with the fog, once they stepped up and got water in the window, things were in pretty good shape. Steve?
Thanks, Dan. Since last year's FDIC and this year's FDIC, we completed a study on attic fires and exterior fire spread. I don't have a lot of time. I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version. Everything I'm going to talk about, if you go to ulfirefightersafety.com, you'll be able to take a couple-hour online training program put together by Julie here in the front row. So if you have questions, you can ask her. There's also a technical report and a fire department summary report. I'm going to skip all the background, and I'm going to go right into the tactical considerations. So as a little bit of background, we looked at 28 different exterior walls, 8-foot by 8-foot walls. What we were getting at is, as wall construction changes over time, and we go from solid wood, maybe cedar, to stucco, to vinyl over wood, to vinyl over wood, to vinyl over foam, all of these things are going to change what you arrive to. So we wanted to look at all different types of wall constructions that will commonly be found across the country. Then we wanted to look at some attics, and how does the fire go up the wall and get into the attic space? So we burned 3 different types of 16 by 16 walls that had a section of attic over top of it to look at that transition from wall to eave to attic. Then we went ahead and we built 4 full-scale attics. Lightweight construction, a little over 1,000 square feet, looking at how fire grows and spreads in an attic space, how it becomes vent limited, and we looked at multiple different tactics to put those fires out. And then we went to the city of Milwaukee, where we got 3 acquired structures, where we looked at different knee wall fires, how fires spread in knee walls, and different tactical considerations there. Here's a look at pretty much how the increased use of plastics are going to change what you arrive to. The one on the left is a vinyl product, or a polypropylene product that is meant to simulate wood siding. The one on the right is wood siding. The pictures on the bottom are 2 minutes after the picture on the top. So 2 minutes into fire growth, you see very different fire behavior. Obviously, if you show up at 6 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is, you're going to see a very different size-up consideration when you arrive. Here's another look at a little bigger scale. Here's our 16 by 16 wall. We looked at 3 different types of construction. The one you're going to see on the left is 2x4 stud walls with 1/2-inch plywood with 4-inch overlapping vinyl siding on top of it. The one in the middle, all it does is it replaces the wood with a rigid foam board. And the one on the right also replaces it with the rigid foam board, but it also has spray foam in the as insulation. And here you go, side by side by side. The cutout on the bottom gives you a view in the attic. One of the things you're going to see right off the bat is with foam, the one all the way to your right. It's not a vented attic. That foam blocks the eaves and makes the attic part of the conditioned space. So if you want to get fire in that attic space, you now need to burn through 6 to 8 inches of foam in order to get into the attic. We start a small fire on the outside. In this case, it's 100 kilowatts. That could be a small trash can. That could be a pile of wood. It could be a decent amount of mulch. If it were a car or a bigger trash can or a garage, obviously that'd be even worse. Coming up on 1.5 minutes. So if you look at the one in the middle, vinyl over rigid foam, we wind up with an attic fire in less than 2 minutes. None of you are getting a call, getting to the scene, getting water on the fire in less than 2 minutes. So with this new type of exterior wall construction, you're looking at transition from a small outside fire to an attic fire well before your arrival. And once it's in the attic, as you know, it's game on from there. One thing that really stuck out as we did this research was the importance of wetting sheathing. As we understood the fire dynamics of how fires grow in an attic space, as you'll see here, we're going to introduce 150 gallons per minute in through the eave line after we hook the eaves open. In this case, there were aluminum eaves on the soffit. 150 gallons a minute, about 15 seconds worth of flow on either side into a well-involved attic that had vented through the roof. Used right around 75 to 80 gallons of water and knocked down the entire attic fire. So then we start trying to understand why this is. And if you understand how attics ventilate and how they're constructed and how they work, pretty much the attic needs airflow on the underside of that decking in order to keep it from developing mold. So to keep it from developing mold, you put the eaves in, and then you put a ridge vent. It can either be a plastic ridge vent or it can be ridge caps, whichever. As the sun heats the roof, it creates a natural flow. Air in low, hot gases out high. So when you have a fire that gets into the attic space, that's exactly how it grows and spreads. If you were to build a campfire, you'd take a whole bunch of sticks, you'd put them in a triangle shape, kind of like a teepee. You would allow air in low, hot gases out high, and it would burn pretty well. That's how our attics are set up. You set them up in a teepee, you let air in low, hot gases out high. Flames want to spread where the fire triangle exists. That fire triangle is going to exist at the sheathing. The air is going to ride in, match the fuel of the off-gassing sheathing, and we have our fire. So if we can put water there to wet that down, cool that off, big chance to get ahead of that fire. Kind of like this. The water will ride up one side of the sheathing and ride down the other side of the sheathing and rain down on everything in between. We calculated the surface area in that attic space, and we were looking about 70% of the burning surfaces are actually the sheathing itself. We did a little demonstration so you can see where the water goes. As that water rides up every joist channel, it's wetting the sheathing, and you watch it rain down on everything in between, severely soaking everything in that attic space. Was really effective. If the fire starts on the outside, start fighting it from the outside. If you have an exterior fire that has a hold of the outside of this building, whether it's a mulch fire that extended on the outside, whether it's a garage on fire, car on fire, deck on fire, porch on fire, you name it, if you don't take the heart of the fire away, you are not going to be able to get ahead of it. So if you commit to the inside of this structure and you get up into that knee wall area of that house, you can flow water all day long. Unless you take away the source of burning on the outside, it is going to continue to replace that heat, and it's going to continue to replace the gases with unburned fuel coming from the exterior. You've got to be able to knock down that outside fire. And then as you knock down that outside fire, be smart about it. Why is the fire able to spread from the exterior into the eaves, into the attic? Because there's a flow path there. If the air can flow there, the fire can flow there. So if you understand building construction, you understand where the heat and the flames can go, that's where you want your water to follow. So don't just focus on the base of the fire on the exterior. Think about where it's going and have your water follow the same path the fire is following. So as you knock down that fire, get the water in the eaves, and if where the fire is going, your water is following, chances are you're going to knock down 95% of that fire just by taking advantage of that fact. Learn to anticipate where and how an exterior fire is going to migrate to the interior. we saw that wall construction changes over time are greatly going to influence how the fire goes from the outside to the inside. So what we saw with older construction styles was that normally if you had a piece of wood on the exterior, whether it was wood, solid wood boards, or plywood or OSB, it would take a significant amount of time to eat through that, and then it would have to get through the drywall to the interior. And drywall is a phenomenal fire barrier until we go ahead and we start making holes in it. So when you have things in the middle, like fiberglass insulation will slow it down. When we go to newer things where we have plastic drywall, another thing that we started to see was this scenario right here, where we replaced our metal outlet boxes with plastic outlet boxes. So now you have a fire that, even though the drywall is a great fire barrier, it's going to migrate from the outside to the inside through the plastic penetrations. So if you have a sofa up against that exterior wall, all it's going to take is a double outlet box or a single outlet box. You're now going to have an ignition source to your sofa on the interior, or your curtains, or things like that. So if you go ahead and start your overhaul on the interior, anticipating where those penetrations are, that's your best place to start. Attic fires are commonly ventilation-limited fires. As Dan discussed what ventilation-limited means, you can have a tremendous fuel load in an attic, and typically there's not a lot of ventilation. Whether you have the ridge vents at the top, whether it's a plastic ridge vent, metal caps, whether you have gable ends, and typically there's not a lot of outlets. So when you don't have a lot of outlets, you will quickly fill that attic with smoke. Without enough air coming in, you're going to see the eaves start to breathe. The eaves then try and act as an air inlet and an exhaust outlet as well. So the attic's going to start breathing in and out, which is really inefficient. So if you really want to get that attic fire going, you go ahead and you make a hole in the roof, because it wants the exhaust to allow for more inlet, which is why it's critical, if you're going to use vertical ventilation as a tactic, to time it really well. That if you go ahead and make your 4x4 hole on a ventilation-limited attic fire, it is going to greatly increase the air that's going to move in, and you will light up the attic. Now, it's not going to be instantaneously, depending on how long the attic's been burning, how fuel-rich it is, and what was actually on fire. There's a number of variables there. But the one thing's a constant. It's looking for the exchange of hot gases out high and cool air in low in order to burn optimally. So if you can time your water going in, taking advantage of the compartmentation of the attic space and the steam conversion to get ahead of the fire, and then open up your vertical vent to get that lift, you're in good coordination. Plastic ridge vents. As we move from metal caps and gable ends to more plastic ridge vents, what we saw in every test was they act as a pretty good ventilation point to start until they heat up, and then they seal on themselves. As you can see in the pictures here, it didn't take long for that plastic and the holes with the outlets to sit on itself and now completely remove your outlet from the equation. So if you pull up and you see a picture like we have on the right here, where you've got heavy smoke pushing out of the eaves, that's your telltale sign right there that you've got a ventilation-limited fire in the attic, because the smoke doesn't want to come down and out. The smoke wants to go up and out. So that's a really good size-up factor that tells you, hey, I need to get some water in here. I've got a ventilation-limited fire. And really, the quickest way to do it, if eave attack is an option, it's a good one, and it doesn't need to be always done from the outside as well, which I'll show you in a second. Attic construction affects stream penetration. Again, it sounds obvious after you look at it, but in many cases, where do we apply water into an attic from? Number of ways. on the one all the way in the top left corner is coming in through a gable end. When you come in through a gable end, you're immediately up against the sides of all the joists. So no matter what angle you get at, you wind up like the picture we have in the top corner here, where even if you get really steep, ultimately you're only affecting about a third of the attic because you can't get water to move down the rest of the attic because it's hitting the sides of the joists and raining down. So if you have a fire in that attic coming out of both sides, you're not going to knock the whole thing down from one gable end because you're not going to be able to wet all those surfaces. You may be able to stop the fire from coming out of one end, but you're going to have to get around to the other end and hit that, and that may not be enough either. You may have to get up on plane and get in through that gable end and hit more surfaces, but again, that becomes an extreme challenge because no matter what angle you direct your stream, you can put the water directly out the other side, but if you don't wet the burning surfaces, the fire's going to come right back. All you're doing is putting out a little gases, and then they're going to come right back. The one in the middle is attacking the fire from the interior. If you have all the surfaces burning in the attic, you're essentially going to have to pull down large chunks of the attic space to get water on the sheathing from below. So you go room by room by room chasing the attic fire around the house, and ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to wet all the burning surfaces. So it can be pretty inefficient that as you put the stream to the left, you hit a side of a rafter, put a stream to the right, you hit a side of the rafter. What you can do is if you get it up there and you get the gases burning out of play, then you can get your attic ladder up there, get water on the rest of the surfaces, which has been pretty productive over time, but you got to understand what's actually working. And then finally, the eave attack on the bottom right shows you that you're able to wet all of those surfaces from one location. Here's what a gable end attack looks like. You can see that the water hits the side and rains down and does not penetrate into the attic space, only wetting about the first 8 to 10 feet of the attic. Now, how do we take advantage of the ability to wet the sheathing, but we can't have access to the eaves? Let's say it's a second floor and it's going to take too long to get the eaves hooked. What other things can you do? Well, here's the case where you can get to the interior, you know you've got an attic fire, you can focus your truck work on hooking one wall or the other, the front wall or the back wall, and then go ahead and direct your water up the sheathing and down the other side, and you can be a little more strategic about how to best wet the most of that attic and take advantage of the construction of the attic to allow your water to cool the most surfaces possible. Let's say you've got a 2-story house. In this case, we've got a center hallway. So let's go ahead and take advantage of the construction. We've got a center hallway that goes side to side on the entire second floor of that house. Go ahead and hook a trough down the center of that hallway. Just make sure as your hose line comes up that water goes down one side, water goes down the other side, and you're focused on wetting the sheathing as you move through that attic space. Consider flowing water up instead of down with a master stream. We see this quite a bit. We go ahead and we switch to defensive operations because we've got fire coming out through the attic space. We go ahead, we put up the big guns, and we go ahead and we flow about 500 to 1,000 gallons per minute down through the hole. Is water going on fire there? Sure it is. Water's going on the flames that are coming out of the roof. Where is the actual fire triangle happening at? Where is the fuel being produced that's mixing that you need to wet? Underside of the roof, right? All you're doing is putting water on the gases and probably trying to fill the house up from the basement all the way up. And if you're able to get the house to hold water till the water gets all the way into the attic, then you're going to win. Rarely works. What if instead of flowing down, take advantage of the construction and get water up underneath, even though you don't see fire? Figure out where the fire's coming from and wet where it's coming from, not where you see it. You'll be much more effective. I think taking advantage of this, instead of taking time to get the ladder up, get the eaves open, get water flowing up, you're going to turn a lot more defensive fires back into offensive fires by getting ahead of the fire. Here's another example. You get these larger, lighter weight construction homes with fire in the attic space. We tend to put our ladder up above the peak, and in this case, they're flowing down into the gable side. That's where the fire is. But what fire are they actually putting out? Very little. They're just putting out the side that the water is flowing in, and as they flow, fire stops coming out. But if they stop flowing, the fire would come right back because all they're doing is putting some of the gases out. They're not getting water on what's actually burning. If they went ahead and dropped that tower down, opened up those eaves, and flowed up the front of the structure and put it where the fire's coming from, as opposed to where they see the fire, there's a chance that they make much more headway there. Apply water on a knee wall fire at the source and towards the direction of spread before committing to the attic. We talked about this a little bit already. The picture on the left there, you pull up, you got fire coming out, you got a room and contents fire, except that fire is lapping into the eaves. That fire lapping into the eaves is going to start spreading on the underside of the attic space, start getting into a knee wall, and start spreading into the peak as well. So once you get your line up to that second floor and you knock that room fire down, take a couple extra seconds to hold the line out the window and shoot it into the eave the same direction the fire was going into the eaves, put some water into the eaves, and then go ahead and get a line up on the floor above and start opening up the knee walls. That little extra step could save you a heck of a lot of trouble. Same thing on the outside fire. Understand where the fire is coming from and where it's going, and take that extra few seconds to sweep that area with your hose line. Knee wall fire dynamics. Many of us understand, or we should all understand, how these knee walls work. Pretty much we take an attic space, we finish it off, we create little triangles in the corners and a triangle at the peak that are all connected to each other through the joists and rafters. Fire gets up into that space, grows in that space. We tried to replicate a scenario that we see all too often. Engine company, truck company, either one or the other or both, come up into the half story at the top of the home. They're looking for the fire. They start venting windows, looking for the fire, and they're not finding the fire. So they start making their way towards the front of the house, room by room, looking for that fire. And in many cases, they get to the front of the house and they're not finding the fire, so they start opening the knee walls. Or a crew comes in behind them and starts opening the knee wall behind them. Or in many cases, the crew coming up made a hole when they got to the top of the steps, but not much was going on, so they move ahead to the front of the attic. And then all of a sudden, things go bad, and we've got firefighters bailing out of that attic space. Well, what's going on with the fire dynamics there? Here's an example of, we opened up about a 3-foot by 3-foot opening in the knee wall and watched how quickly things could begin to go bad. And the trick here was, because you have such a fuel-rich, ventilation-limited condition in that knee wall, it could take 5 minutes after opening that area of the knee wall before things really start going bad. So on the fire ground, think of what you're doing 3 minutes after you make that opening. You've possibly moved on to like 3 other tasks from the moment that gets opened until things go bad. So we have trouble connecting, making that opening in the knee wall with conditions deteriorating. So if you go ahead and make that opening, it takes a while to get air in there, mix with the fuel, develop the heat, and cause things to go bad. So you might have a crew that makes that hole, stretches their hose line to the front, make another hole, they're looking for the fire, and all of a sudden it comes up behind them, and it was actually an action that looked pretty innocent at the time, But when that mixing got going, things dropped to the floor. So we need to take advantage of the same scenario here, wetting the surfaces in the knee wall space. And again, here's where we have the struggles of the construction. As you get a hose line into that knee wall and you spray there, you're up against the rafters all the way down the attic space. So if you've got no visibility and you're flowing into that knee wall, you might be hitting the rafter 2 feet in front of you, and all it's doing is throwing all your water sideways and back at you. You're not getting any penetration down. So you have to systematically work your way down and cool down that attic space, understanding where your water's going, even if you have limited to no visibility in that space. You got to understand that those rafters are working against you. So if you can get your line in and shoot it up and walk your way down that attic space, paying attention to both sides of the knee wall as well as that peak over your head, cooling as you go, whether you see fire or not, you're going to greatly reduce the chance of having something pop out on you.
Momentarily, we're going to open up the floor to some questions for our fire researchers and George here. But I wanted to finish up with our portion of this presentation today by speaking to those individuals in the audience who are lucky enough to work in an area in which they're getting multiple companies and multiple personnel arriving within minutes to fight structure fires. Do we have any individuals that are in the audience? Okay. Urban fire departments, some of your largest suburban fire departments and big city fire departments often have very specific operations that are spelled out in their books, as we call it. Okay, the house that you see here, an urban private dwelling. This is any town USA private dwelling that you'll see. And George's department, my department, have specific operations for every type of fire building that we'll encounter. We have typical fire buildings in Milwaukee, and in New York, we have procedures for each one. I get 35 people coming in the city of Milwaukee. George gets 60. So essentially what George and I are managing as chief officers are adequate resources, as we'll call it, okay? I have 3 engines, 3 trucks, 3 chiefs, and a rescue company all coming within 5 to 7 minutes, okay? They know where they're supposed to go based on their order of arrival, when they're supposed to be there, and what they're supposed to be carrying when they get there. Spelled out. I mean, we're not robots, but essentially we know based on our order arrival on the response ticket that's printed out what I'll be doing at this particular incident based on the type of fire building I see when I pull up. Okay? Are there any inherent issues with that? We think they are. That many people coming within 5 to 7 minutes. No, not freelance. Okay? Every one of those 35 individuals wants to do something as soon as they get there, right? Okay? If I'm the first new truck, I'm operating on the fire floor. If I'm the second new truck, I'm going to the floor above. I know that every time. And I'm doing exterior horizontal ventilation. If I have an outside vent firefighter, rear vent firefighter, whatever you call them. Okay? They all want to do something when they get there. Okay? So as chief officers, you also have to kind of take that perspective and realize I might need to hold people up, okay? There usually isn't much radio chatter in the first few minutes of any of our structure fires because of that. They're spreading out, okay? But maybe you need to hop on the radio and say, hold that window. No, we're having issues with the line. Don't take any windows, okay? That kind of stuff needs to be taking place. Another inherent problem is, and one of the fallacies is I don't really need to incorporate all this stuff because I can start water in under 5 minutes in a lot of our areas of our city. Okay, anybody hear that? You hearing that argument? Yeah, it's out there. Okay, and with that, we are not seeing individuals that are considering a transitional attack. Do I need to do a transitional attack on every single fire? If I have fire out one window, do I have to do a transitional attack every time on that window? No, you don't. Okay, not only are your buildings building specific, or your operations building specific, they have to be fire specific as well now, as well. Okay, so keep that in consideration. And transitional attack has kind of been vilified as this thing that big cities shouldn't have to do or don't have to do, because I get 2 or 3 Hoseline stretched right away. Okay, so when you all was in the city of Milwaukee last July, we talked about extensively. We talked about, okay, when will we incorporate it? Well, if I can't get my Hoseline placed on the primary means of egress because of the fire conditions, I'm going to do something about it. And we came up with a few scenarios in which an urban city or a department with multiple people arriving in companies would incorporate it. And so we said, what we're going to do? We're going to film it. We're going to film a real-time transitional attack on how it should look when everybody's pulling up and everybody wants to do something. Okay. We captured on a couple angles some very good footage of it all coming together and showing that transitional attack or resetting the fire or hitting it hard from the air, whatever you want to call it, isn't necessarily a defeatist position or stance on the fire ground. It isn't a defensive operation, writing off the operation, writing off victims in the structure because we have these specific fire conditions now. Okay? We are showing, and I'm going to show you in a second here, that it can take an advanced fire condition, convert it to a minor fire condition or reducing those temperatures, and actually taking fires out. Some chiefs would write off, and I'll let you guys decide when you see the fire conditions here whether or not you would call it if you were a chief officer and you pull up on scene. And taking a lot more of those fires and making those offensive fires. Okay, utilizing this tactic we're about to show you will afford you that ability to do a lot more of that. So something to consider. Okay. All right, here we have our unoccupied 2.5-story wood frame private dwelling. First 2 engines pulling up. Here comes the truck that's right behind it out of the same firehouse. Would you consider this an advanced fire? I fire all 3 windows, right? Do I have a life hazard in the structure? You don't yet. Now we do. What do we see here? And you may not see it now. I should probably add this. You'll see in a second here. That's the first company officer who's about to do his 360. He's being grabbed by the occupant of that structure who is saying, I have a child on the first floor in her bedroom. What's the tenability on that first floor? Or what's our survivability profile of that woman's young child? Okay. Keep your answers for a moment when Steve gets back up here. We're going to talk about some of the temperatures we'll see. Okay. So what we have here is the first 2 engines and trucks, or first and second 2 engine are pulling up, first 2 truck, and the rescue are pulling up. In Milwaukee, we stretch to the back door in these private dwellings because that's where the interior stairs to access every level of the structure is. So they're going to start working on the door. Okay, first 2 engine is starting the line, second 2 engine is going to help them. Now what do you see? Fire's going up. Okay, we have asphalt shingling on here, or Polish brick as we call it in Milwaukee. I'm half Polish, I can use that one. But that contributes to an interior and now an exterior fire spread. Okay? But rather than sit there and watch that truck bang the tools together for a few minutes, the first 2 engine now has a charged line. What can they do? Hit it for 3 or 4 seconds. Now look what happens. Door's forced, they're going to control it. Everyone's masking up, they're going right in. There's still plenty of fire in this structure. Plenty of fire, as you can see in that center window there. How long do you think all this took? I think this entire video is maybe 2 minutes and 30 seconds? Okay. Would you consider that an aggressive offensive interior attack? Yeah. Okay. How many of us have sat there with a charged hose line, busting the truck's chops because they can't force the door or they're stuck at force blancher or something? We're sitting there with a charged line with fire out numerous windows. Anybody ever have that been there? I sure have, you bet. Okay? But, okay, we're getting kind of our heads on straight here with a lot of this stuff. I have a known life hazard inside this structure. I have an advanced fire condition. I may have a savable occupant, I may not. But I have 35 firefighters that want to get inside that fire building because we have that known life hazard. And now we afforded them the opportunity to do that in a much more tenable environment, much safer environment, and it allows us to get our Hoseline in there faster and the truck and the rescue in there faster to start looking for that 4-year-old kid. Okay? So that's what we really wanted to end with here today. This was actually, if you look on the far right, this is actually a helmet cam from one of the firefighters I was recording. Okay? We had numerous angles of this, and each angle had just a really great perspective. So consider this, folks. Just because you work for a big city means you can't incorporate this stuff. Okay? You may not, the way you implement it may be different from a smaller or rural community, but the principles still apply. Okay? Thank you, folks.
The beauty of this is it's not just a demonstration. It's an experiment as well. So we're taking measurements to understand the effectiveness. What you see here, the 4 dots in those rooms, are temperature measurements that we're taking floor to ceiling. You can see how much water they flowed in each one of the openings. He started with the living room on the front, 4 seconds of water there, 2 seconds of water in the bathroom, 3 seconds in one window in the kitchen, 5 seconds in the second window of the kitchen, off the ceiling. Arrival to water flow, pretty much when they pulled the maxi brake of the engine until they were flowing water, was 1 minute and 10 seconds. And it took them 30 seconds till they were ready to get inside. They were forcing the door, getting ready to go, flowing 14 seconds of water at about 150 gallons a minute. That initial knockdown, 35 gallons of water. Here's what the living room temperatures look like. So the first place they flowed water, before water was 600 degrees at 3 feet. Before they went in, it was 200 degrees at 3 feet. In the kitchen, before water, 1,300 degrees. After water, right before entry, 300 degrees. The open bedroom, before water was 500 degrees, before entry was 200 degrees. This is a bedroom that is directly behind the kitchen fire room that was 1,300 plus degrees. And then the closed bedroom, the label's wrong there, but the closed bedroom, 70 degrees to 70 degrees. Where's your survivable space in that house? What's the quickest way to get rescuers in there to pull someone out of that room? They got to go through the other 3 rooms of fire to get there. They're either going to VEIS that, or if the fire gets knocked down that fastly, as the engine goes in, the truck and the rescue are right behind them. They're getting in that room, affecting that rescue. So you can see what a dramatic effect that 14 seconds of water in the right places with the fire coming out of the window dramatically reduced temperatures throughout that space, making it so all those guys could get in there and do work.
All right, folks, as you can see, you have the ulfirefightersafety.com site on here. You get a lot of the technical reports and everything that we've been discussing today, as well as Dan Majikowski's section of NIST. So a lot of great information there. What we're going to do now is kind of open the floor for any questions you have. We have 3 microphones, set up here. Ask questions, folks. I know it's the end of the day. It's beer 30, but I know some of you guys have questions. Come on. Please come to the mic, though, so everyone in the room can hear you.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Very good.
Great to see you again this year. This is the biggest draw to FDIC, is seeing you guys, and I appreciate you coming again. Have you guys done anything with opposing hose streams at all and that kind of thing? How that affects anything?
In Spartanburg, in that 2-story that we saw, after we knocked down the fire in those rooms, we had some fire spreading into the attic, and so we let it redevelop basically across the second floor. And then anywhere we had an open window, we flowed a line. We had basically a monitor nozzle coming from the one side, 2 hand lines in the front, monitor nozzle on the other side, knocked the fire down very quickly. Again, a lot of the opposing hose streams might be an issue if we're changing pressure, right? And if you physically are hitting somebody with the hose stream, that's not a pleasant thing. What we're advocating for this initial resetting of the fire is cooling the gases, taking the gases. So we want you to hit it high, bounce it off the ceiling. So basically, whatever you're using, a solid stream or a straight stream, it becomes a broken stream at that point in time, taking away any concerns about impacting somebody that might be inside by hitting them head on with 180 gallons per minute of water or something like that.
A lot of it comes down to air, paying attention to the air. That if you're going to have a master stream that is 50 feet away from the building and it's broken up by the time it gets to the window and it completely fills the window, and you have a crew with another hose line coming in a different direction, if the water isn't allowing the vent to continue to be an exhaust, it's got to go somewhere. And if we're moving air in both directions, we're going to have flow going in both directions. Are we going to have fire envelope everybody? No. But can you have some heat move if you have air moving it and you start blocking exits? Absolutely. So it's understanding that and coordinating that. And if you understand that and can coordinate it, you can have two different hose teams operating in two different areas as long as you're doing it right. And in many cases, a lot of what we've looked at has been initial company operations and the placement of the first hose line dictating operations, in which case the fire usually goes away, in which case opposing hose lines doesn't become an issue because we don't have an entire floor of fire. Even in the Spartanburg, there was 3 or 4 rooms. In the Milwaukee incident, there was 3 rooms of fire, all taken care of very quickly with one hose line. We haven't done anything with floors of commercial buildings on fire where you've got a center core, an entire floor of furniture on fire with multiple hose lines working around a center core building. We have not done that.
But we have incidents like the Cook County building where the city of Chicago did that. On the 12th floor, exterior streams, the fire remained in its, the compartmentation that was there kept the fire to the basically 25% of the floor of that building, and they knocked it out like that, where they couldn't get to it with an interior attack.
Question over here.
My name's Eric out of Park City, Utah. Question for you about positive pressure attacks and positive pressure ventilation. Our department's been somewhat progressive and firm on this fire attack method for a while now. This past couple months, I've been trying to implement the SLICERS acronym, and I think it's awesome. We have a lot of guys that are giving us heartache over it, though, when it comes to the vent limited entry after knockdown, because they're still very much hung up on the positive pressure aspect of it. What are your thoughts on that? Do you see in the future incorporating positive pressure ventilation tactics with the SLICERS acronym? I hope maybe it's a little more insight in that area.
Sure. So this December, we conducted a series of, how many was it, Julie? 24, 20, something like 24 different experiments looking at better understanding positive pressure attack. We also had a number of scenarios where we combined transitional attack with positive pressure attack. And we're in the process of analyzing all that data, and we'll package it all up. And by next FDIC, we'll have a full-blown training program that incorporates all of that. And probably as part of the Science in the Big Room session, we'll be talking about all the results of those tests. It's understanding the tactics, understanding how they fit together, doing the tools in the toolbox approach that George talked about, and deploying them in a way that makes sense. So I'm not going to tell you how to fight your fires, but I'll tell you the impacts of the different tactics and how possibly they can be pieced together for a good outcome.
And I will tell you that there are fire departments around the country that have been doing that for years. They hit it from the outside, typically rural departments in Montana, Colorado. They have fire shown from the outside. They hit it from the outside. In the meantime, they set up the fan at the front door, and then they go in and get it. They reset the fire and then start using PPA.
With good results.
With good results.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Jeff. From Bluffton, South Carolina. And what's interesting is the control of air that seems to be kind of the topic right now. So I'm curious from either of the chiefs, do your departments have your dispatchers notify occupants when they're leaving to shut the doors? And is that being helpful?
Yeah, it's actually the last thing our dispatchers usually say. They'll say, exit the building and please close your door behind you. Yeah, absolutely. Luckily they've been doing that, long before the science, but that's a good point. It's definitely something to, or a good crusade for on the dispatch side, without a doubt.
I think that'd be an awesome public education.
Good question. Thank you.
Normally they darken the lights and play music.
Hey, in a transitional attack approach, have there been any studies done on the effects of steam conversion to victims as far as flow path through the building, that sort of thing?
That's something that continues to be worked on. In fact, just at the hot class, anybody that was there Tuesday, we conducted a test where there was a fire in the second-story bedroom. We were assuming that a victim might be laying in the hallway outside, so we had heat flux gauges in the hallway. We had thermocouples in the hallway, and we also had a thermal imager view in the hallway. And very similar to the thermal imager view you saw today when they introduced water from the first floor into the two windows that were burning on the second floor, knocked the fire down, conditions in the hallway got better. The heat flux, which started at about 7 to 8 kilowatts per meter squared, reduced down to 2 kilowatts per meter squared. So once you get about a threshold of 5 kilowatts per meter squared on bare skin, you're feeling pain within seconds. So that victim would have been feeling pain from the thermal energy from the hot gases overhead. And once it was hit, we didn't see any spike that you might see if we were providing additional heat due to the water condensing on the skin or anything like that. It cooled right down. UL is hoping to get a new grant to do some work where they're going to look at using pig skins and heat flux gauges as well, again, to get the show me part of it to the fire service to say, well, look what happens, did it burn or not, type of thing. Another thing to remember is that there's some misunderstanding going around about tenability limits for humans. And everybody understands that has a sauna, or up in the North Country, a sauna, as they call it, right? The dry sauna, you could take a higher temperature than a wet sauna, and that's because water is a better conductor of heat than dry air is. But the thing to keep in mind is that one of the principal combustion products, anytime you're burning any kind of hydrocarbons, such as these foams and plastics and things, and even wood, is water vapor. So H2O is one of the combustion products. So you never have a scenario where your victim is laying in a hot, dry area. They're always in a hot, moist area. So there's already hot, moist air there impacting them before you even arrive.
Okay. Yep. I got a question right here.
Yes. Could you touch on the effect of wind in relation to flow paths and things of that nature?
Absolutely. The wind produces a pressure against the building. As part of the size up, wind is what you want to consider. You want to keep the wind at your back. Let the wind work with you. Anybody that does any wildland fire work, that's just beat into them. That's about a third of their book. Figure out what the wind is and be upwind of the fire. Keep the wind at your back. It's the same thing with structure fires. Anybody in the room was there on the day 2 of the hot training? Yeah, so we had about a 40-mile-an-hour wind that was hitting the rear of the structure, and we had a vent on the side of the structure. And the structure started basically acting like an airplane wing. So what it did was, instead of pushing the fire in the structure, it actually sucked the flame out of the structure. But again, getting upwind of the fire is your best location. Anything from FD&Y you want to mention?
No, I mean, we went through the whole challenge of wind-driven fires and high-rise fireproof multiple dwellings and a series of line-of-duty deaths. And it was enlightening when we started dealing with NIST at the time to find out that a 10-mile-per-hour wind was more than enough to change conditions in a matter of seconds. And we call it now wind-impacted fires, but that could allow the fire to blowtorch along the flow path, high pressure to low pressure, and whether it be Vandalia Avenue or Jimmy Williams, we had a number of those fires where tragically firefighters lost their lives. And now, sometimes in a high-rise building, on upper floors, you can't choose what direction you're going to attack the fire from because there is only one direction, up the stairs and down the hallway. That's why now we have wind control devices, we have high-rise nozzles to control that thermal hazard prior to us making entry onto the fire floor.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, just for clarification for me, is the data showing as far as flow paths and introducing water that as long as we're just introducing water without fog pattern or any additional pressure, we're not pushing the fire, but by the laws of thermodynamics, we're actually allowing the fire path to pull the cooler gases through?
That's a correct understanding, because the thing to remember is the fire service was always taught that as you would apply water, put water into a heated space, what did they say the water would do? It would expand 1,700 times, right? But the thing that counteracts that is if you already have these expanded hot gases that are in the house and you cool them down from 1,800 degrees down to 200 degrees or less, what do? They contract the same amount. So you're balancing that. So the key is don't play around with it and try to put 5 gallons per water in there. Hit it, 100 gallons, 150 gallons, 180 gallons. Open the line, hit it, knock it down. I know that Steve in his example showed that they only used 14 seconds of water. Please don't anyone run out of here and say, we're putting in our SOP, we're going to apply 14 seconds of water. You're looking for an impact, right? If you can impact it in a few seconds, knock it down and move on to the next window, or your guys are ready to go interior perfect, you may need to flow for 30 seconds in one window or more to get the impact that you're looking for to knock it down before you make entry.
And one of the things quite often I get asked, Chief, how long should we flow water from the exterior? And I use Dan's line, it depends. But one of the things that I think, or two of the things you should look at is how effective has that exterior stream been at knockdown and controlling the fire? And then with your resources and the physical layout of the structure, how long is it going to take you to reposition that hose line into the structure where the main body of fire was, to continue final extinguishment? And if you say, well, the door's right here and the stairs are there, we're going to be up the stairs, it's only going to take us 10 seconds, okay, fine. But now if you have to reposition that hose line around the front, go through the front door, and you say, you know what, Chief, potentially it could take us a couple of minutes, a minute and a half, flow a little bit more water. Or as Dan said, if that line's just going in, hitting the ceiling, and basically turning that room into what? A sprinklered space, right? You're creating a sprinkler head in that room. Well, could you even leave one member out on that exterior hose line, continuing to flow water, and a secondary backup line go inside? Again, we're not dealing with that opposing hose lines where you're going to get hit with a blast of water in the face because it's going off the ceiling. And when that interior crew is in position to advance into the fire area, engine 2 to command, we're in position, have them shut down the exterior line. Then we're going from exterior line to interior line.
Okay, we'll take one final question over here.
Questions about ventilation-limited basement fires. When the fire hasn't self-vented, tactics for that. And there's concern about the stability of the floor.
Water in anywhere. Window, any kind of door, any kind of opening where you can flow water. If the only way to introduce water is basically opening up some sort of inspection hole at the threshold, getting water in there. The big concern, of course, is even with a thermal imaging camera, it cannot tell you about the structural integrity of that floor unless it's already vented, and then you'll be able to see that. But if wood is a great insulator, anything we put on top of the wood, foam plastics, carpeting, whatnot, are great insulators. So you could have 100-degree Fahrenheit showing up in your tick on top of that floor, and it could be post-flashover underneath, and the integrity is already gone. It's darkened itself down by the time you got there because it ran out of oxygen. But it's, operating over a fire on an unprotected or unrated wood floor is just not a good idea anymore. Same thing for the roof structures. I think everybody probably saw the firefighter in California that went through the roof. Questions that we don't know exactly yet, but how long were they on scene? How long was the fire burning? You never know, unless somebody says, I just saw the fire start, but that's very rare. All this needs to go into the risk assessment. All this is part of the size up. We've been talking about lightweight construction now for years and years and years, and it's the structure that fails, not necessarily the decking. Right, and I think that's the biggest difference. I Working with FD&Y in Chicago, I had the opportunity to, talk to some senior members of the department, and they were telling both Steve and I, they said, Dan, we don't get this because, we've been on this row house and we'll be walking on the joist, the old 2x8 joist, and the flooring's gone or the roof decking is gone, and we've got no concern about falling through it, sturdy as can be. And Sean DeCrane, what he did was he went to a vacant house that was built around the 1930s or so, and he cut out a floor that was in there with a truck company that had the 2x8s in it and had the 1x6 tongue and groove, wood planking, and they put it on the UL furnace. They had a grant from NIST, and we compared it to the new construction, the old construction. And the old floor lasted a lot longer, 18 minutes versus, say, 8 minutes to collapse. But the method of collapse, the mechanism collapse was very different as well. So the structure in the modern home collapses, but the decking is still good. Where in the older one, it starts to fail the 1x6s first before the structure starts to go away. So the size of the penetration, the amount of the floor or the amount of the roof that's going to fail is very different. And your ability to sound the roof or figure it out or see what's going on is also going to be very different as well. Because the OSB or the plywood or whatever the decking is doesn't feel too bad, but in fact the stuff that's holding it up could be gone, and then down you'll go. So again, all that fire service wide needs to be reevaluated. But you want to cool off a ventilation limit condition any way you can, or at least be ready to cool it as soon as you're opening it up. Coordinate it very closely.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, folks, we're going to give the room back to FDIC here, but I want to remind you guys, tonight is the Courage of Valor Run. For those of you who signed up, good luck on your run tonight. And afterwards, the National Fallen Firefighters has their Stop, Drop, Rock, and Roll. So two great events. Hope to see you guys there. Thank you all very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of the show.